Hello emerging cricket fans and welcome to another episode of the show. We sit down with umpire Claire Polosak this week, but first a shout out to those who support us on Patreon. From as little as $2 a month as a patron, you can access bonus content at Emerging Cricket and have a say on the show's direction. To sign up, log on to Patreon, that's patreon.com/emergingcricket. But for now, enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another Emerging Cricket podcast online and on Sport FM in Perth. I'm Daniel Beswick. I'll be joined by Tim Cutler and Nick Skinner in a few moments, but first some news from around the world. It was a quiet night at the IPL auction for emerging players on Thursday, with no associates picked up for the 2021 tournament. Singapore's Tim David and Nepal's Sandeep Lamachane went unsold, with USA's Ali Khan and UAE's Kartik Mayapan never presented on the auction block. It was happier news in the PSL with Ali Khan and Irish opener Paul Sterling signing on with Islamabad United. Khan made his debut last PSL with Karachi Kings and comes into the tournament after winning the CPL last year with Trinbago. Sterling, meanwhile, joins off the back of an ICC Player of the Month nomination and 209 runs in the Abu Dhabi T10 at a strike rate of 230. In a boost for cricket in Germany, 6 new teams will feature in the Women's Bundesliga for 2021, up from 9 in the 2020 season. The expansion has meant the North-East regional group will split as separate North and East groups, with the winners of the 4 groups advancing to the semi-finals in September. Germany's women's team won all 9 of their international T20 matches last year and will compete in T20 World Cup qualifying in August. And finally, Nepal's men's team have continued their training camp in spite of their cancelled World Cup League 2 tri-series against Oman and the USA. After naming a preliminary squad of 32 players, the group has been trimmed down to 20 under new coach Dav Watmore, with Nepal's next international action a World Cup League 2 tri-series in Scotland against the hosts and Namibia. That's all the news in the emerging game this week. For more, log on to emergingcricket.com. Coming up, we sit down with a pioneer in international cricket, recently becoming the first woman to stand in a men's one-day international and the first woman to officiate in a men's test match. Claire Polosak has been a leading match official for a number of years. In part 1 of our chat with Claire, we discuss her beginnings in umpiring, the pressures of the game at the highest level, and the state of the game in women's and associate cricket.
I'm Catherine Bryce, an all-rounder for the Scotland women's cricket team, and you're listening to the Emerging Cricket podcast.
The guest list on the Emerging Cricket podcast continues to grow, and in a first on the show, we have a match official. Boys, the usual welcome. Ooh. The records and history made by our guest is probably a little bit too long for an intro, but we're delighted to welcome umpire and umpire educator with a focus on female umpire engagement. Claire Polosak, thanks for joining the Emerging Cricket podcast.
No, look, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to chat to you guys.
It's been a really busy summer for you. We've seen you create plenty of history over the Test series here in Australia against India. If you could probably just give us a reflection on that early doors and what's on the agenda for you at the moment.
Yeah, I think the Test series really was quite a surprise. It came a little bit out of the woodwork, but being in the environment that, dealing with the Test players, the Test umpires, was a fantastic learning experience, really. Took a lot away from it and just trying to absorb and watch what the elite guys were doing to prepare an umpire. So it was really, really enjoyable experience.
To probably take away from one of Nick's 1,000 questions tonight, you were the 4th umpire for a large portion of that series. To the average watcher at home, what does the 4th umpire role entail? Yeah,
I think a good way to think about it is like the 12th man. So it's the 12th man of the umpiring team, there to support the guys with whatever they need to ensure that they can concentrate on the field, the business stuff, getting their decisions correct. So, looking after the pitch before the game starts, having the replacement balls, having the new ball ready after 80 overs, seeing if the players who have gone off the field for injury, if they're actually receiving treatment or if they're just kicking back and relaxing. There was a bit of wet weather around, so working with the groundsman to try and get the ground ready as soon as we possibly can. So a lot of little things in the background to make sure that the day goes smoothly for the guys on field.
I'm looking at Nick intently watching over our production notes, and before we got you on today, I didn't even get a chance to come up with a couple of ideas because Nick, as a budding umpire himself, has quite a few things. But I think we've kept up with your progress. We watched you in Namibia World Cricket League 2, officiating in that final of the tournament where, well, I suppose everyone got a sort of half day off because Namibia just ran through their opposition. Looking back on that, and I suppose ticking off these highlights and achievements over the course of your umpiring career, take us back to when you started. How did you start umpiring? What was your inspiration? What drew you to the game and officiating in it?
Yeah, I never played cricket. I grew up in Goulburn, and there's no there was no girls cricket when I was growing up. But it was just something I was really interested in. I had, instead of having the Backstreet Boys on my wall, I had the Australian men's team on my wall. Followed cricket. Every year our family holiday would be to come to the Sydney Test match. So I followed cricket from a distance, and then when I was about 15, friend's dad actually put the umpiring course to me. So unlike Tim, I wasn't able to pass the exam first up as a 15-year-old. It did take me a couple of times to get there. I don't know if I ever made it to 92% in the assessment, but it was. But it was. I kept, being 15, never played cricket. It was just something that I was really, really determined to do. I can't tell you why exactly, but every time I did it, I got a little bit better. I started umpiring once I did pass in Goulburn in the men's competition, and then moved over to Sydney club cricket when I came up to university, and just moved my way up through the ranks over the last few years or so.
We should probably give some context to that 92% remark. Nick, I'm looking at you. Do you want to perhaps deliver your flex on this podcast just to get the ball rolling here?
Well, it's Gerrit Erasmus's highest one-day score, but it's it's also my my pass mark on the umpiring course I did a number of years ago under the tutelage of Darren Goodger, who's I've since learned works right next to Claire in the office. So it's all coming back together.
Yeah.
And Claire has since stalked him on the system, looked him straight up. And,
What's power if you don't have the access, right?
So Claire, you've just talked about how there was no girls team in Goulburn, and that's why you didn't play. And obviously, female engagement is a big part of your role with Cricket Australia. How have you seen the progress for women, both in terms of playing and in terms of officiating within Australia over the years you've been working here?
Yeah, I think 2016 was when the New South Wales Breakers first became the fully professional women's team. And I think from then, what I've really enjoyed is the fact that now, with the increased training, with the increased professionalism, with the increased athleticism, now when you go to a WBBL game or a women's international match, there's little boys, kids are watching the game, and it's boys are watching the women's game, and they don't care. And I think that's been the biggest impact, that they're just watching cricket. They just enjoy the game. And that's, I think, has been the biggest change that I've seen there. When I started in Cricket New South Wales in 2016 in my role, really great foresight. And I've been really lucky with the opportunity, because females make up 50% of the population, and why aren't there more female umpires? And I think it really comes down to awareness that it is possible. A female who started umpiring maybe 3 or 4 years ago, she first said to me she's always wanted to be an umpire, but she's never known how to become one. So providing the awareness that there is a pathway, that there are opportunities, I think is really important. And that's from a playing, coaching, officiating, whatever aspect it is really important there.
Yeah, Rod Lyle, one of the emerging cricket contributors, made the same point at a women's Big Bash we attended a few weeks ago, pointing to a kid in the crowd who had one of the women players' names on the shirt, and so that his hero was a female player, and that's obviously a huge step forward. You just talked about how obviously you're trying to provide a sort of a mentoring role for other women. Who were your mentors coming through, both in the umpiring scene and as you've sort of developed in your role here?
Well, when I first attended the laws courses, Simon Taufel was in his peak of umpiring. In our association, we have a black and white newsletter that comes out a few times a year. And I don't remember this, but recently when you have stuff at your parents' house and you collect it, and then they ask you to get rid of it, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Mum's always complaining about that.
Yeah. And I was going through some stuff, and I found an article that Simon had written for that newsletter, and that it had blue tack on the back. So I reckon that must have been on my wall when I was growing up. So there was that. But I think once you start umpiring, you sort of take bits and pieces from everybody and asking questions and taking on feedback. And so I can't really name one mentor since I've been umpiring. But I mean, Darren Goodger, as we just mentioned, is just phenomenal person, phenomenal educator. And what he doesn't know about cricket and umpiring isn't probably worth knowing. And we've got Ben Trelaw, who's contracted umpire as well, really close friend now. We worked out that we actually did the laws course at the same time. And so it's been really good to get to know and be really good friends there. And then we've got little bits of everybody you sort of take away and learn from, which is really nice. And it adds to the camaraderie, I think, in the umpiring fraternity.
Talked about the pathway and that woman you talked about who wanted to be an umpire and came through and didn't know where to start. What is the pathway to become an umpire these days? If there are people listening or kids out there that are keen to officiate rather than play, where do you start?
Yeah, so in New South Wales, we've got a couple of options. We do have a level 1 community officiating that's accredited with Cricket Australia. And it's aimed at mums and dads and players who have to umpire their own games. And then we've also got a level 2 laws course, which is what most of us on the call have done. It takes, we cover all of the laws. Sorry, Daniel, for stitching up.
That's okay.
But, we cover all of the laws, and then there's assessment task at the end. Once you've passed the assessment task and you've become a member of the Umpire Association, it's all about getting as many games as you possibly can. And then taking on the feedback. We have off-field observers and on-field observers, captain's marks, and then they sort of add up to how you're performing. And then it's only through merit in New South Wales that you pass up through the grades. It can take a bit of time, really, but it's just making sure that you're ready for the next opportunity that you get. And then we've got so once you're in the first grade panel, we do have a state umpire panel who we look after or are appointed to like WNCL or WBBL. And then in normal worlds, 4th umpire for the BBL. And then we've got the supplementary panel, which is 6 contracted umpires. And then this year there were 10 Cricket Australia contracted umpires full time. So that's sort of the general pathway there, but it takes a lot of time. We get a lot of people who start the laws course wanting to be a test umpire tomorrow. And there's a really good statistic that they're in, since the history of test cricket, and I have to get the numbers now right, because we've had a couple of test debuts just recently. So I think Anil might be the most recent one in India. But there's about 480 test umpires or 490 test umpires since the 1700s. But since we've had space travel, so in the 1950s, there's been 560 astronauts. So it's actually more common for you to go to space than you are to be a test umpire. So it's a tight funnel.
That is a great stat.
Yeah, the COVID has increased the numbers of umpires, but there's definitely, it's a tight funnel for those that get there.
So you've talked about the pathway sort of within Australia. We met you in Namibia and you were officiating an ICC tournament. So what's the pathway, going through the international stuff, and especially looking on the associate side of things? Because that was the last ICC Division 2 tournament in the World Cricket League, which was an associate tournament.
Yep. So it's really up to the home boards to develop and educate and train the umpires. And then I guess after that, or with that, there's 3 panels of umpires for the ICC. So we've got the 12 elite that are doing the test matches that we see. And then every nation of the full member countries have an international umpire panel, and their top 3 or 4 umpires are there. And then underneath that, we've got the development panel, which is comprised of about 30 to 40 umpires. And they're the ones that come from the associate nations that you see more often in the associate nation competitions. And then they've also got the 8 females on that panel as well, from a mixture of associate and also full member nations there. So it's from that development panel there that the appointments for Namibia, for example, come from, or the appointments for the other World Cricket League that happened before Namibia. They all came from that sort of group of development panel umpires.
So are the umpires randomly allocated, or do you sort of put your hand up and say, I'd like to visit Namibia. Can I go? Or like, is there kind of a combination of that?
Yeah, it's whenever you see an email from the ICC, you're like, oh, what's this going to be about? So it's completely random. Well, sorry, I'm sure it's not completely random, but I don't nominate to go to places, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's a surprise when you get an email, or if Cricket Australia contact you to find out if you can available to go somewhere. So I'm sure there's a plan, but I don't. Fantastic trip that I did do was to Samoa in 2016 for the qualifiers.
Oh, nice.
For the One Day World Cup. I haven't put my hand up going, I'd rather go to Samoa over this other place. So
I was interested in one of your previous answers. You talked about taking pieces of advice or using examples from other umpires that you perhaps, looked up to. But thinking about, the game of cricket and the way that it's officiated, I suppose in the game of cricket, there's a little bit of leeway. There's more interaction between, say, players and match officials than other sports. What are the kind of lessons that you've taken and really run with in terms of your umpiring career?
Yeah, I like to think of my umpiring as we're a jack in the box, and we only really come out when we're spoken to or we're asked a question. So I think that's really, we're there to facilitate a match. So to allow the players to do that as much as possible within the realms of the laws and the spirit. So I only speak on field when I'm spoken to, and not making it about us, if that makes sense. So that's what I try and do with the game. I tend to find that the fact that I've got a double X chromosome generally means that I'll stand out a little bit more than normal. So I just try and, we've had a good day if umpires don't get noticed on the field of play, really.
Nick Skinner, the wicketkeeper and the umpire, doesn't like to get noticed on the field.
It's yin and yang, mate. You've got to have balance in all things. So just on that, I guess the philosophy that you have towards the job. So how much information do you usually give to players, and how do you go about explaining decisions when you are asked? And I guess just generally, how do you approach game management? Are you more the sort of disciplinarian, or you like have a joke with them, or like what's your approach?
For any budding umpires or any umpires are listening, I think what's really important and something that Simon Taffel is very strong on is that we are ourselves on the field of play. So if you're a genuinely funny person, you can be funny on the field. If you're genuinely not funny, then don't try and be funny, because it's just going to come over flat and you lose any sort of relationship that you've got with the players. So try and be yourself. When I'm explaining decisions, I'm really careful about the language that I use. So if I said the difference between saying, in my opinion, the ball was going down leg, or I think the ball was going down leg, if you get a player who knows you, they're like, well, come on, player, what's the story today? Do you think or do you know? So trying to be really concise about how you say things, in my opinion, because they might disagree with your opinion, but it's your opinion. There's nothing that they can do about that. So just trying to be really clear. Don't enter into any protracted conversations on the field if you can. A really good diffuser is, look, happy to talk about it after the game. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to remember and you won't.
I'll see you in the parking lot.
Yeah, something like that.
So interesting, not interesting. I guess it makes sense to be yourself out there. It's like any walk of life, isn't it? You're going to be better when you're being yourself. Me back in the dating world, I guess that's what I should be telling myself as well. Just be.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's why I'm having no success. Who knows?
That's a tough one there.
You're saying don't be myself.
More Simpsons quotes, Tim, I reckon.
Is this about Claire or about you, Tim?
So being yourself, I guess that's on the field, but then sort of off the field. How much interaction, we're hearing everything about bubbles, hearing about players getting to know every other team they're playing against by playing franchise cricket with and against them. What's it like for umpires? Because I'm sure you're in a similar situation, seeing players more often than umpires of the past. What does that mean for keeping relationships professional? Like we all heard accusations of umpires ending players' careers with one decision and the things that can boil over. How does that go in terms of managing that relationship?
I guess and again, everybody is different, and it just comes down to being a good person, I guess. But at the same time, I'm not going to run around and find a female player to play table tennis with. So if you're in the lift and you happen to be in the lift together, or if in the WBBL, we had to line up to get served for food. I find that players don't often want to talk to umpires, but if they make eye contact, they feel like they've got to talk. So it's just about, hi, how you going? What's going on? I mean, In the WBBL, I got dressed for breakfast. I came down to the lift and the Scorchers team was there. And I looked at what I was wearing, which was an orange shirt and black trousers. And Amy Jones is there. And she sort of looked at me and I've looked at her and I don't think I dressed quite well today because I could have just hopped on the team bus with them. So it's about finding those little moments that you can have without pushing yourselves onto them as umpires, because people don't really want to be friends with umpires. So it's just about trying to subtly work on those relationships as much as you possibly can.
It sounds like you're somewhere between school teacher and like you're running a school camp or a holiday camp. You know, it's kind of like be friends, but you still...
No, be friendly, but not friends. You've nailed that one there, I reckon.
But no, that's what it sort of feels like. You're close, but like
at arm's reach.
Making friends at work, but not even. It's kind of like no, it's a different relationship. We can't actually be really friends, and it must be tough when you meet people that you get on really well with. You know how to go that. I guess that's similar for coaches and players, but I just think this sort of bubble atmosphere even harder.
And it's different as well when you've seen in the girls. You know, you've seen the girls play in under 18s for a number of years, and now they're playing WBBL, or with the boys. Or the male players, you know, started with them in 5th grade and now they're in 1st grade with me as well. So you do get to know players over a number of years, but I'm certainly not Facebook friends with any of them or connected to many of them on Instagram.
LinkedIn might get a workout though. But I was thinking, actually, a story that just popped into my head while you were talking about that, Claire, was when we were in Namibia, and I remember seeing all you guys, I think, eating together. I think it was at Joe's Ale House in downtown Windhoek. Oh, yes. And we just happened to sit right next to the umpires.
Yeah, talk about sitting next to the teachers.
And one of the guests that Tim invited on this particular evening was Hong Kong wicketkeeper Scott McKechnie, who had run into a bit of hot water a little bit earlier in that tournament. It might have actually been that day. And I think I remember him turning around to Tim and myself thinking, oh, I shouldn't be here. This feels really, really awkward.
That was good to see the look on his face as he looked around, and it was like he'd just been caught shoplifting as well. He was like, oh, we were the journalists, so we were like, you know, nerdy table anyway, so we can't speak.
But it's the same, you know, you give a player out LBW, they've massive nicked it onto their pads, and then you push the elevator button, and there they are when the doors open. You're like, oh, great. Now we need to do real small talk.
It's a lovely day, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that, what's, you know, we are all human. Maybe not Bez when he's working on stars, but what is the mental process for not letting a mistake get to you? You know, whether it's a bit like a player, whether you believe in form or not. You know, there's always a lot more of the game to go in the next game. You know, how do you work through that in your head?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that everybody makes mistakes. So I've recently read that the cricket is a game of mistakes. If the fielding team never made a mistake, then the batting team wouldn't be able to score any runs. And if the batting team didn't make any mistakes, then the fielding team wouldn't be able to take any wickets. So mistakes, you know, umpires are only ever called into the game when a player does make a mistake. And as you sort of alluded to there, if you can't let go of it or move on from one mistake, the next ball that comes to you, you're in trouble. So Darren Goodger has said that there's 2 reasons why an umpire will make a mistake. The first one is that the ball's just too good for you. Okay, there's nothing you could have done. It's just is what it is. It's just too good. Just like players receive balls that are too good for them. The other reason why umpires generally makes mistakes is that their mind isn't where their body is. So they're thinking about the previous delivery. They're thinking about the fact that they've got what's happening at work. Their mind isn't where their body is. So it's all about trying your best to be absolutely present in the moment for the decisions that you need to make. If I have made a real or a perceived error, and there's a difference there, real or perceived error, I try, and it's so easy to say move on, but what I do at the next opportunity I've got is I make a note on my overs card so that it's a shopping list for me. Hopefully I don't get a shopping list of errors, but I've written it down so that I don't have to remember it, which means that if there is footage available, I can go back and look at overs 34.4 or whatever it is. So that for me, the physical act of taking it, writing it down, takes it out of my brain, and I can think about it and worry about it later and review anything if anything's available. So yeah, but everybody's got their different strategies on how to do that, and everybody will be different. What might work for me won't necessarily work for Nick, and it's just about trial and erroring it to see what does work for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up, kind of making the mental note. But to think, looking back at say, World Cricket League 2 again, and we saw basically a flawless performance from you in the middle. And there were a couple of really high pressure situations, that USA-Namibia game in particular, that went down to the last over. And I remember doing the stream with Lenny and just looking at all these decisions that were just spot on, like tight runouts, tight LBWs, no third umpire, stuff like that. But talking about, when you do make mistakes, and everyone does make them in any field, what's the process of actually going through and talking it through? Do you discuss it with someone else? I know with streams and not having the camera straight on, it's probably very difficult to assess a number of decisions at that lower level. But I suppose as you move up and you get the technology to work with, you can assess things a little bit better. What's the process there?
Yeah, so I think looking if there is footage available, look as you said, depending on the level of the game, and try and work out what was different in your routine that had made that error. So could it be the fact that you only slept 6 hours the night before instead of 8 hours the night before? Could it, a lot of umpiring comes down to the preparation. And so, were you hydrated well enough? Did you eat well enough in the lead up to it? Were you standing in the same spot? What were you watching? Were you watching what was important at that particular time? And then it's really quite self-reflective, but it's important to have one or two people that you trust that know umpiring or know officiating, that you can bounce ideas around to try and work out what was different or what to try next time. I am Darren Goodger is one of my bouncy ideas offies persons. And, really enjoy talking about umpiring with him. My husband is another one who sometimes he gets too into it, and he wants to know wants to go into it real detail. I'm like, no, I just need to let it off my chest. I can work it through myself. So just having those people that you trust, that you can talk to, is really important. But a lot of decisions in umpiring, you can ruin a fantastic decision with a poor explanation as well. Or you might have made a really good decision in club cricket, but everyone on the field thinks you've got it wrong. So that's a perceived error. So there's no guarantee that you have made an error. It's just that nobody likes what you've said. So yeah, working out what you did differently to other deliveries and what you might change next time. Because you're right, mistakes happen, and they're a really important part of learning. Even, you never if you walk off a cricket field thinking you've had a perfect game as an umpire, then you're lying to yourself, to be quite honest, because there's always something that you can learn and something that you can improve on for next time.
Yeah, I know there were a few situations with some rather large fellows talking to you. And you also kind of talked about the double X chromosome and standing out on that front. How do you kind of manage that, being a woman, and have you found that impacts the way that the players treat you, or has it not been an issue throughout your career?
Well, I don't know what they're like when I'm not around, but I have, instances where players will swear and then they go, oh, sorry, and they'll apologize for swearing. Or the striker is taking guard and they're like, oh, is that centre, sir? And then he'll look up and he'll see me, and then they get really flustered, Nick, because they're like, oh no, what have I said the wrong thing? What? Yeah. And I'm like, whatever, it's fine. I had a player in first grade just 2 weekends ago who said, oh, sorry for the swearing, Claire. And I said, that's okay, as long as it doesn't leave the boundary. And he's like, oh, so I can say whatever I want then? I said, well, to a certain point. But I think my understanding, what I think is that players don't care what gender umpires are, as long as they get the decisions right, or they're doing their best to get the decisions right. So it's hard to answer, because I don't know what they're like when I'm not around. But I think being a school teacher, and that's all that is people management and communication. I think there's a lot of transferable skills. I umpired before I was a teacher, so maybe they've gone both ways there. So there's a lot of transferable skills there. If you're a clear communicator and a good people manager, you can generally deal with most things that come into the realm of player management there.
And this is one that I've kind of wondered. You've been involved in some, really entertaining matches. Do you enjoy watching the game itself, or, watching an amazing spell of bowling? Or are you too focused on thinking about, where's the ball going? Or is that going to hit the stumps? Or what? So are you getting caught up in the job more than sort of watching the game itself?
Yeah, I can walk off a cricket field and not know what the score was at the end of the innings. Mm-hmm. I've just have no idea whatsoever. Even I was third umpire today in the New South Wales Victoria one-day game.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden I think I saw the score at 250, and then it was at 3:15, and I turned to the match referee. I was like, how did that happen? Because I just wasn't paying attention to it. I did enjoy being on the field, though, when Alyssa Healy scored 148 against Sri Lanka at North Sydney a couple of years ago. That was just clean hitting to watch and fantastic to watch. My favorite, like you talk about being, watching what's on the field, my favorite part of an international cricket game, though, is just the moment when everybody's lined up before we go out for the national anthems, because I just find that is such a special time. There's some nations that get really passionate about their anthems, and just that anticipation as we walk out onto the field and the anthem ceremony is my favorite part of an international cricket game, I think.
I suppose to draw on that again and moving up the ranks and going from club cricket to domestic cricket and then ultimately international cricket. I suppose the other factor to talk about in all of this and the decision-making process is perhaps the crowd. And I know that for the last 12, 18 months, we haven't quite seen the crowd in its, 100% state. But what's that like, dealing with that external pressure from the other side of the boundary?
Yeah, the biggest crowd I've umpired in front of was in 2018 in the West Indies for the India-England semi-final in Antigua. And it was just noise. It was just absolute noise. But fortunately, if you're focusing on what you need to focus, it just becomes white noise in the background. A tip Darren again gave us was, if you just concentrate on the tap of the bat, if you can hear the tap of the bat on the ground as the striker's getting ready, then you'll be able to hear anything, and that you're really focused in on that. So that helps there. And if there's any other criticism or reactions from the crowd, then that's okay. They've all got their own opinion, and they can come and stand in the middle of the ground, and if they want to, and have a go and see how they go at that.
That is something that I have thought about. If the noise is that loud, can you hear a nick, especially a fine one? Because in some places, it must be incredibly difficult to pick up anything.
Yeah, you've just got to trust your eyes. Trust your eyes on what you're seeing in those environments. Talking to Kim Cotton, who was on field for the Australia-India T20 final 12 months ago, with 86,000 people at the MCG. When Australia was fielding, I can't remember who was batting, but there was a little under edge, and Alyssa Healy was up to the stumps, and Kim was like, didn't hear it, couldn't hear a thing, but she just trusted her eyes and her many years of experience of umpiring. Club cricket, you can rely on your ears, but not once you've got a lot of crowd noise that can hurt you in a way.
So in that sort of situation, are you looking at cues from the players themselves and sort of gauging kind of body language and how they react to the situation?
Yes and no. You've got to really know the players that you're working with. And it's not something you can tell beginner umpires or early career umpires, because it's a hard one. And to be honest, I tried to do it earlier this year in a club game and got stuffed. It just didn't work for me. The batter has played at the ball. It's the bat has hit the ground at the same time it's hit the ball, and I watched him and he gave me nothing, so I gave him not out. So sometimes the striker flicks their head really quickly to look at the keeper. There are those sort of cues where they start to walk and then they come back, but you've got to really know the players before you can use that as a piece of information. Otherwise it won't work for you.
So basically, the psychopaths are never going to be given out that way.
Yeah, quite possibly. They'll stare you down. Yeah.
So you talked about the crowd factor, but how do different natural conditions affect the job? I'm thinking pitches with maybe variable bounce or different kind of weather conditions, and how do you adjust to that to try and make sure that you've got the same decision making process no matter where you're officiating?
Yeah, I really like standing at square leg for the first over of a game. And that's not because I'm trying to shirk responsibility for starting the match. That's because I use that first over to have a look at what the bounce is doing for the beginning of the game and trying to get that information as quickly as I possibly can. We can talking to the groundsman sometimes will give you insider information on how the pitch normally plays. Going to net sessions with the teams helps you to develop that relationship with the teams, but also to work out what sort of bowlers or what sort of batters and shots might be to expecting there. And talking to other umpires who have already umpired at the ground can also help you. We send these things around called paving stones, and it's just like notes about the teams or notes about the grounds that might help the next person that comes across either of those. There's a couple of things that you can do, but I guess the trick is, though, to use all those information and to adapt as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of the issues, well, a lot of the things that the umpires need to consider are very similar to how the players go about their business as well. We are all trying to play in a way that is effective in regards to conditions, but to look to umpiring as well, it's definitely something to factor in. And just looking at, say, this India-England test match at the moment, where all the talk has been about the surface, and it's taken the attention away from a lot of actually what's gone on the field. I suppose, umpiring in different conditions, and looking towards, say, Namibia, again in World Cricket League 2, where an associate country, perhaps, the conditions aren't exactly conducive for top-class international cricket. Are there any external difficulties for that for match officials, or is it a case of getting that first match out of the way and then getting into the rhythm of it once more?
Yeah, I think getting into the rhythm, having a look at the local environment when you get to the different environments, wherever that is. But something that Darren said, again, maybe you should get Darren on the show.
Sounds like it.
I feel like he's here.
he has said that if a pitch is hard to bat on, then a pitch is hard to umpire on. And so I think that's very similar with the players trying to deal with what they're faced and the umpires having to as well. So I don't know if that answers your question there, Dan, but yeah.
No, I can imagine at times, when wickets are tumbling and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, there's only so much mental effort and concentration that someone has over the course of the day, right? So I can imagine, on days where, the ball's doing a lot and you're forced to make a lot of decisions, especially early in the day, it could be tricky, building into, say, the end of the day, or if you're doing a test match, for example, into days 2 to 5 potentially.
Yeah, I had a 4-day game, it would have been maybe 2 or 3 seasons ago, when we were playing with the Dukes balls, and it was obviously a 2 innings match, and it was over by tea on day 3, I think. And so it happened all quite quickly. It might have even been early on day 3, but it happened all very, very quickly. Lots of decisions. Fortunately, a lot of them were just nicks to second slip, but it was a lot going on, and something that even if there aren't a lot of decisions to make, umpires are making decisions all of the time. So a couple of weekends ago, we had in Sydney Premier Cricket, we have a captain's meeting in first and second grade, and the captain said, nobody got hit on the pad, so you didn't have to make any decisions. I'm like, hang on a minute. I didn't say anything during the meeting, but in my head, I'm like, every time a ball's delivered, we make 5 or 6 decisions. So, there's a lot of other stuff going on when a lot seems to be happening, and when things aren't happening at the same time.
I can imagine, are there bowlers that you do look at and you just know that they're always candidates of having a lot of LBW decisions, and you kind of earmark a few different players? It's like, oh, hang on, I think I've got to have my work cut out for me in this particular instance.
Yeah, there are bowlers where you're in the game every time they deliver a ball, and there's bowlers that from practice that they're going to be close to the front foot, or they're going to be in the protected area, and that's part of the paving stones that we share with each other, so that you've got that information, so you're forearmed for it when they do come to your end.
So one of you, we mentioned the the India Test match just before. One of the more controversial moments was the discussion around playing a shot, and whether the batsman's playing a shot when the bat is tucked behind the pad. How do you actually determine whether a shot has been played for LBW purposes? So
it comes down to if there's been a genuine attempt to play the ball, which doesn't answer your question whatsoever. But a genuine attempt for a number 2 batter will be different to a genuine attempt for a number 11 batter because of their skill level. And to be honest, I haven't watched a lot of the Indian Test match, so I'm not sure the exact decision or incidences that you're referring to there. But if the batter has tucked their bat behind the pad, that probably doesn't look like a genuine attempt to play the ball. And it doesn't have to be a good shot that's played. It just has to be a genuine attempt at playing the ball. So you might not like the shot, but if they've tried to play the ball to the best of their ability, then that would be regarded as a shot being played. In fact, as a genuine attempt to play the ball. Sorry, I'm not going to call it playing a shot.
Changing tack a little bit, we talked about how the opportunity for girls and women has grown and developed, mainly, I guess, through an Australian lens. One of the most inspiring parts of what we do is to learn about stories of Papua New Guinea, Thailand, Samoa, you mentioned, has the highest number of junior female players across the associate world, interestingly. And we've seen how the game has created opportunities for girls and women in those countries. Is officiating a bit like a poor cousin? Like, should we be using officiating, whether it's scoring or umpiring, as a way to drive broader participation in these nations? Is that an opportunity? Or have you seen it used here in Australia and things that could be done overseas as well?
I don't know, to be honest, but the first response that came in my head was, why not? Why not get more females involved at any level of cricket or any position of cricket there? PNG had Helen as an umpire for a number of years, but I think she's stopped now. And there's a few others, a female umpire in Oman, I think, and there's a couple of others floating around. But there's no reason why, I would hope there's no reason why you can't get more females involved. It's just, as we said, you can't be what you can't see. So if they don't see the female umpiring, exposed to them in their home country, then how do they know that it's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember hearing a story from Krakengow Cricket Club in Hong Kong, and they would tour all these, I'd say random, but places that you wouldn't expect. And they went to Saudi Arabia years ago, and all the umpires were female, because that was the easiest road to participation. It seemed, because they were able to dress in an appropriate manner for there, and it was, so they were quite taken aback. And I think that was about 10 years ago now, and Saudi Arabia has teams playing. But it's just interesting to see how those elements of participation could be used. But I guess we see countries like Nigeria forever sort of talking about them running umpires and scorers courses. Just hope that they can run some that focus and really show girls and women there that it's just as open to them as well, and especially a place like Nigeria, who've just put out their plan, or the first time they've said it, that their plan is to become a full member of the ICC. So the more people involved, the better. So yeah, I sort of asked that question. I know you're not going to come as an expert on the topic in terms of growth and development now. I just thought of the opportunities that you've seen and how that's grown in Australia, and we've seen how it's growing on the playing side overseas, whether the two could sort of mold together.
Yeah, I hope that they would come together because when a lot of male players finish playing, then they become umpires. In England, it's a backlog of ex-first-class players wanting to be an umpire. But it's funny, when I talk to the female players in New South Wales, they're like, oh, no, I don't want to be an umpire because I've seen the sort of crap that I give umpires, and I don't want to repeat it. I'm like, well, don't give the umpires hard time. Might help that out. But
that is one solution.
Oh, see, just as you're talking about that question came to mind. We may have debated offline whether good players make good commentators or not. What about players making umpires? You said yourself you didn't play, and it sounds like you've done all right for yourself. And you're seeing all young and old umpires coming through. Is there a pattern, or anything scientific? I guess the numbers are there about who makes better umpires.
I don't know if there's anything scientific about it, but I do think that potentially if you've been a player and you become an umpire, you probably get a bit of a head start because you've got that game awareness and that match awareness. But Sue Redfern, another umpire from England, has said that because she played for England. She played, I think she's the first female to both play and umpire in a World Cup. So she played in the 1997 World Cup in India, and then officiated in the 2017 World Cup in England. And she has said that potentially when she first started umpiring, she had a bit of a head start. But then for me, coming in purely from an umpiring perspective, we look at the game differently. And so that has probably, while it took me maybe a little bit longer than if I'd have been a player, we've reached the same point there, having the different lenses, looking at the game there.
Yeah, I'm actually, and from that, wondering if you team up particularly well with individual umpires at the other end. Are there people that you tend to umpire better with, or you find it easier with?
I wouldn't say that I find it better or find it easier, but something that my husband said, I think it was before we went to, recently, the last trip that we had was the T20 World Cup. And he sort of said to me, you're just going away with your mates now, aren't you? I'm like, well, yeah, we are. We do get on quite well. And there's obviously, like in any part of life, there's people that you gravitate to more than others. But there's a couple that I'm on WhatsApp, chatting all the time to. And then there's others that, you turn up, you do your job, and then that's it. And that's just purely, any workplace. I imagine that you'd find the same sort of thing there. So it's a lot of fun now. I'm so lucky to be able to umpire. So I love umpiring, and then to travel and to meet all these people from around the places. I was very fortunate.
So we've seen in the emerging cricket world, around the women's side of the game has been especially successful at breaking through. We look at Hong Kong and we look at Namibia and we look at Mexico and all these places. Thailand, of course, the most notable. Do you think the same's true of women's umpiring, or is there more work to do on that front within associate cricket countries?
Yeah, I think there's more work to do. I think it was Tim that said umpiring can be the poor cousin. I think umpiring's not sexy. It's hard to convince people, I guess, in some respects, to jump on board with it. So I think there's definitely more that can be done and should be done, but it's really down to the home boards to drive it. There's no point in head offices saying you need to do this. It needs to come from the local associations.
And just on that, I know that Australia and some of the state associations do some work with helping development of playing in the East Asia Pacific region. Victoria has some links with Japan, for example, and PNG has played in a number of tournaments in Australia. Is there much of that sort of engagement on the umpiring front?
Not as much. When we were in Samoa in 2016, Cricket Australia did send over the umpire educator for Cricket Australia, and we did some workshops with the local umpires. When I have been traveling, we have tried to have sessions with umpires, if it's just a Q&A session or a scenario-based session. But in terms of the organised from a board point of view, there's not really anything down that avenue. But you might be suggesting about how I do get overseas when we're allowed to travel to go and develop more umpires there. That would be fun. I'd really enjoy that. But there's not a lot that I'm aware of happening at the moment anyway.
That's the end of part 1. We'll have part 2 with Claire next week. Make sure to subscribe to the Emerging Cricket Podcast if you haven't done so already, so you can tune in as soon as it drops every week. Pass the pod around, and make sure to give us a 5-star review. If you want to support us financially, go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/emergingcricket, where you can support us from as little as $2 a month. You'll get access to extended shows of a number of our podcasts, and you'll also have a say on the show's direction. For now, on behalf of Nick Skinner, Tim Cutler, and myself, Daniel Beswick, see you next week.